When it comes to Western animation, you kind of just you can't ignore Avatar: The Last Airbender. And I'm not going to talk about the series overall, not today, we've got way too much else to get through. Just let it be known that if you've not seen it, I thank you for the view, and I'm telling you to at least try the first handful of episodes right now. It's good. Other than that, well, let's do this, shall we? Let's break down every single episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender in celebration of the franchise's imminent return, for better or for worse. And speaking of worse, The Great Divide is likely one of the most well-known Avatar: The Last Airbender episodes, because it's near unanimously known as being the singular worst Avatar: The Last Airbender episode. And for the most part, yeah, I agree. The Great Divide is bland and boring, with only a few good jokes thrown in here and there, and no interesting B-plot to distract from the A-plot. The newly introduced characters are extremely generic, and it's pretty clear why they never show up later. That being said, the final resolution is unexpected, to say the least. It actually makes you think, and if it had a better backing, it could honestly work as doing the wrong thing for the right reason. But with that being said, the conclusion just doesn't quite feel worth sitting through the rest of these two tribes to get through. And this is also the one and only singular episode of Avatar: The Last Airbender that does not foreshadow or tie into anything else. Another good reason why Divide is unanimously disliked. It's the only episode I will recommend to skip. Whew, we got it over with, there we go.
Next!
You know, despite The Great Divide being far more universally despised by the general fan base of ATLA, I kind of had a hard time choosing between it and the waterbending scroll for the lowest point of the series. Divide might be more bland and boring, that's true, but the waterbending scroll was, how best to put it, the closest I felt the series got to feeling like just your average kids show. Now, that being said, it's still a very entertaining kids show, with a great battle at the end and a lot more genuinely funny moments in The Great Divide. And probably my favourite aspect, emphasising that these characters are really three-dimensional. Katara is not a perfect person. She gets jealous, she gets angry, she gets hot-headed, but she learns. Obviously, comparing any of the episodes to Divide will make them seem great in comparison. So, compared to the rest of the series, despite having its moments, the waterbending scroll just does not hold up particularly well. How do you convince people that you can't really see into the future? As this episode shows us, you can't, honestly. The fortune teller is one of the very few times where it feels like the show attempts to conquer some deep and meaningful themes, and it doesn't quite work out. Still, the comedy here is top-notch as can be expected from most of Avatar, with Sokka getting the standout moment. It's also nice to see Aang be somewhat at peace with his upcoming destiny for once, even if it's only because of his current distraction for something else. And not to mention, the fortune teller is almost entirely worth it for another wonderful dollop of wisdom from best character Iroh a few episodes later in Battle of the Water Tribe. So we've got that, even if him and Zuko don't show up in this one. You know, a lot of these bottom listing episodes don't have any Zuko and Iroh. Interesting. Now, don't get me wrong, for what it wants to focus its narrative on, this episode is good. The comedy is as good as it has ever been, and the relationship between Aang and Katara is fun to watch. The trouble is, that's all the episode is, at least for the vast majority. It's fun. There's not much of the epic scope that separates Avatar from the majority of other shows and animation to be found here. It's fun. Are there good things about it? Absolutely. The Nomad hippies are a standout, and Zuko and Iroh, well, they're there. The first episode here with them, yay! And they're certainly entertaining, if a little on the weak side in terms of what we usually get from them. The ex-prince's attempt to live life out in the open fail miserably, and I'm going to go out on a limb and say Iroh got himself poisoned on purpose to get the guy back to civilization. All in all, a good episode with great little bits and pieces, but not overly memorable. You know, what some people consider to be one of this episode's downfalls, I actually consider a positive. Very similarly to Katara and the waterbending scroll, Aang acts like, well, he acts like a child, an actual kid. He's not perfect by any stretch of the words. He's selfish and he does things out of emotional impulse, which might be not morally right. Personally, I like it. However, you can probably tell by it only landing at number 50, this episode's dragged down by something else. Bato is just... oh, he's not an interesting character. The best he has to offer is just knowing the father of two of our leads. It speaks volumes that, despite part of the episode being incredibly memorable, the episode itself tends to be forgotten by a general fan base, myself included, just because it's, oh yeah, the Bato episode. As for those incredibly memorable moments, there's the introduction of a new character and the very entertaining B-plot. Someone who won't appear again until over 2 seasons later. The battle with June and her pet are some of the highlights of the first book and elevate this episode almost entirely on their own. So overall, good, but not great. Once you get to book 2 of Avatar, there are little to no chapters that don't tie in very well to the overall narrative. Avatar Day, if you couldn't tell, is one of the exceptions. The townsfolk that the team visit are just obnoxious and aggravating to watch, and yes, I understand they're written to be that way, but it doesn't stop you from feeling that annoyance that Avatar Day is just a big old detour rather than the main course of the second book. Still, hey, doesn't mean it can't be a fun detour. Zuko and Iroh are as well done as always, though it's actually one of the first times his advice is so hard-hitting and relatable. The relationship between these two are by far the highlight of the first half of an already great book 2. But hey, the gang's misadventures actually aren't half bad this episode either. Sokka makes for a wonderful Sherlock with Katara as his Holmes. Okay, it's the other way around, but shush, don't let him hear you say that. And despite the irritation of the villagers, the payoff at the episode's climax with Avatar Kyoshi is just about worth it. Warriors of Kyoshi, at least in my opinion, is the benchmark where episodes go from okay to a very solid good. And despite being at the bottom end, this episode's no exception. It's down here because the gender equality situation is handled in a way I think is just a little too heavy-handed in the first half. Like, I swear, someone will have said word for word, wow, girls can fight too? Like, no, you got Katara, you got Toph, you got Azula, they're what you need. That being said, the episode does subvert your expectations in a genuine and character building way, with Sokka getting a lot of the good stuff in every sense of the word. Even if the Zuko and Iroh parts of the episodes are on the weaker side of things,
girl when I should have treated
okay.
you like a warrior.
They aren't the focus,
I am a
or
warrior.
even the secondary focus of the chapter. The titular
I'm a
Kyoshi
girl,
warriors
too.
and the Avatar gang are those, and its final
Now
message,
get out of here.
in my
We'll hold
personal
them
opinion, makes the former leaders one of the best female role models out there.
Appa, you
Yeesh. A lot of these hold-down episodes are pretty Sokka focused, aren't
Back
they?
to the ship!
I swear, I
Don't
love the guy.
lose sight of
He's
them!
unlucky episode-wise. This is the first Book 3 episode in the ranking, my personal favourite of the 3 parts, and while it's no means at all bad, I can certainly see why the Painted Lady isn't held in such high regard as the rest of the season. It's one of the few you could skip without the plot impacting that much of the rest of the season, but unlike your usual filler chapters, this is one you really shouldn't skip over, even in a quick binge. Katara is near her best. Toph, Aang and Sokka are as good as ever, and the new fishing town we explore is an intriguing place, even if the villagers, the brothers that we spend most of our time with, are fine, just kinda kooky and weird for the sake of it. By the end of it, the Painted Lady almost has a vibe similar to the best Scooby-Doo episodes, and yes, that's a good thing. A lack of our favourite scarred Prince Boy and his uncle does hurt it, like so many of the other chapters this side of the ranking, but on the other hand not nearly as badly. It's also not hurt, at least in my opinion, by the environmental message, something that's, just by a lovely coincidence, shared by the episode just above it. That's something that, everyone needs to be aware of, and it's not distracting at all. It's only a singular piece of the puzzle that's the Painted Lady episode. The swamp of Avatar is one of the most memorable locations in a series chock-a-block full of memorable locations. The dark, claustrophobic environment is what really makes this chapter of the story stand out the most, although it is, of course, not the only thing. Visions of the past, present and future haunting our characters as they stumble through the swamp are particularly chilling, if, a little cliche, but hey, it doesn't mean it's not good. And Aang's in particular is intriguing setup for something, or rather someone, to be revealed several episodes later. So, with all those good parts to the swamp, and I didn't even touch on the final message of the chapter, which was a very magical moment indeed, you'd likely be surprised to find it this low in the list. Well, the large chunk we spend with Appa and Momo isn't all that interesting, and the swamp people chasing them only become interesting characters in the final chunk of the episode. Combine that with not very good rewatch value, with the mystery being the part that gets you invested the most, the majority of the rest being, PG horror that won't be overly dangerous. Throw in an ability learned by Aang once this episode and then never again for the rest of the series, and you have a mixed bag that is the swamp. The beginning of a legend, both of Aang himself in the Avatar universe and of Avatar The Last Airbender in our real life. Despite not even being in the top 40 of this list, The Boy in the Iceberg is a really solid beginning. True, it's brought down by, being the first episode. The characters are childish, they're reckless, and the whole thing does kind of feel like a cartoon for kids for a large chunk of it. But to combat against this downside, there are definitely a couple of things worth noting. First, it's very fun to go back here and compare Aang, Katara, Sokka and Zuko here to the finales Aang, Katara, Sokka and Zuko. Seriously, they have changed enough to become almost unrecognisable, and makes any rewatching of this series start off so strong, I'd argue much stronger than first time viewings. Second, while it's true a chunk of it does feel like a kids show, there are many more chunks. The fascinating intro, the reveal of Aang the Avatar, the exploration of an abandoned Fire Nation ship, and the reveal of Prince Zuko that delicately weave the beginning of a truly fantastic story. Chapter 1, great, solid. This episode feels like wasted potential. If Imprisoned was a chapter in Book 2 or Book 3, I feel like it would be a much darker, much more in-depth and much more memorable than it currently is. And you know what? That's very high praise considering the latter two-thirds of this episode is pretty dark, in-depth and memorable. True, the first third isn't, but it's kind of funny, so I'm not complaining. But when we get to the second half, the core idea of it, Earthbenders separated from any fragment of the element they had any control over, is fairly frightening, and the decrepit look and actions of the Earthbender themselves totally sell it. When the moment is supposed to be, grand rebellion, the silence after Katara's all-in speech hits, and it is chilling stuff. It was something when choosing where to put this episode, something to do with working hard. I can't quite put my finger on it. In any case, Bitter Work is a bit of a slower episode. You could almost call it filler, but outside of a very, very small amount of episodes, most of which we've already passed on, Avatar The Last Airbender has no filler chapters. Lightning bending, the reflection of lightning bending, a key concept all the way over in Book 3, and even in the grand finale. Other than that, we also get some philosophy as good as ever from Uncle Iroh, detailing the Four Nations and a deeper understanding and moulding of the relationship between Aang, Katara and now newcomer Toph. And that's not even going into the pretty hilarious comedic subplot with Sokka. So all in all, it's not a hugely memorable episode, but it is a very enjoyable one. With one exception I will point out, however. Zuko's final moments in the thunderstorm. On paper, in a vacuum, the moment sounds utterly epic, but this is the one and only time where I do feel the voice actor lets him down a little. The scene could have been so much more, but he doesn't seem to go past the point of the angry yell. It's a real shame. I love his actor most of the time, it's great. Similarly to Bitter Work, The Serpent's Pass is not a hugely important chapter of Avatar. It is not some grand finale to a plot, or even the start of one. It is quite literally built to be the crossroads, or, well, the path between the first and second half of Book 2. And for what it is, it's absolutely fantastic. We get the return of not one, but two great characters. The former wasn't even meant to return, but did so due to how popular she was among fans. And the latter, a personal favourite of mine. Doesn't seem to be quite as liked among the fandom, but I guess I can see why. Some great gags, and even more than that, some very touching personal moments for both Aang and Sokka. Aang especially, as we finally get a look into his mindset ever since losing his Sky Bison. Zuko and Iroh don't have quite as much heart, but set up for some fantastic moments and have the funniest parts of the episodes. The very second chapter of Avatar, combined with the first if you happen to be watching it on Netflix, already proves to be a rather substantial step up from the very, very first. Aang finally gets to show off his airbending, Sokka and Katara get their first piece of character development, which would eventually spiral into a grand 1,000-piece puzzle each, and we get the slightest bit of insight into the mentality of Prince Zuko. Not through his words, no, but through his desperate, near suicidal attempts to capture and contain the mythical Avatar. Something is driving him to do this more than simply being told to do so, though we'll have to wait for another 11 chapters to find out exactly what. There's not much of Iroh in this episode, unfortunately, but it's still an important one and very enjoyable. This episode is similar to Winter Solstice, but in the negative way. It's an episode I didn't think would rank as low as it did. Still, it does have a fault that is no fault of its own. It's an episode centred around mystery and twists, and as a result, holds up fine on rewatch, but not extremely well. However, the first time you watch the chapter, it's a really fun romp, a very fun romp that is pivotal to the finale as a whole. Strange how often that happens in this show. The inventor and his disabled son, the latter which I could have felt like forced representation in a less amazing show, but here he's great. Are great characters that I wish we could have seen more of. Being forced to work for the enemy too is something we don't see a lot of in Avatar, but hey, we have this episode at the very least, and Northern Air Temple is a very good example of one. I will be completely honest and say, I didn't expect this two-part special chapter to land as high as they did. The second half of Winter Solstice was great, but I remembered little to nothing interesting about the first. However, on a quick rewatch, I knew I needed to bump it up quite a few places. In the first half of this first ever multi-part group of episodes, if you don't count chapters 1 and 2, which isn't official, so I'm just going to leave it out of it, we get our first glimpse into the wondrous and fairly terrifying spirit world. I know that the Legend of Korra goes way deeper into this other world, but since I've not seen it yet, I'm just going to keep it Avatar. It's kept mostly in the unknown, but from what we do see, it's a scary place inhabited by strange and confusing creatures, and even keeps shadows of Avatar's past. And this leads directly into the rather superior second part of the duo, where the gang's storming of a Fire Nation temple finally gets our Avatar boy the information that will push the rest of the series forward. Sozin's comet is coming. We have a time limit. The clock is ticking, and for the first time we can see it. Roku's entrance is fantastic. There are a lot of careful foreshadowings going on. Heck, we even see a dragon for the first time, and come on. We need the Tales of Iroh so we can know what his journey to the spirit world was like. Come on, Nick. Come on, Michael and Brian. You know we want it. Despite it being so low, even though, every single episode this low is still absolutely a good episode, I'm really glad this chapter exists. Not for the first time, but for the first time it's been properly front and centre for an entire episode. We get a dive into Aang's psyche. See just what he thinks about facing the true evil that is the Fire Lord. Strangely enough, it's not really been touched on outside of the occasional line or two. Ozai, I adore that name by the way, it just sounds so positively villainous, has burrowed his way deep into the dark corners of Aang's mind, and he isn't coming out without a fight. Team Avatar needs to convince the boy his irrational fears and panic attacks of the pure evil that awaits them are just that, irrational. He needs to get over his anxiety and fast, but as anyone with that would know, it's not always so easy. Like I said, I really do appreciate what this episode is trying to do. I just think it focuses a little bit too much on the comedy and not quite enough on the darkness of the upcoming war. The highlight though, and what propels it up, other than, Momo Nappa, is Zuko. This is him beginning to realise just how truly unhappy he is back at his father's right hand, and watching his mind battle with itself in the heart of the Fire Nation is something I'm always on the edge of my seat for. It doesn't have too much in terms of importance to the overall story, and the very end with Team Avatar feels just a little too easy, but Nightmares and Daydreams is a pretty underrated episode, I'd say. The Avatar state. Not the state itself, but the episodes. You seem to be one of the less remembered episodes of Book 2, similar to Northern Air Temple in Book 1. But you give a really solid, earth puns, introduction to the might and nobility, or at the very least the complexity of the Earth Kingdom people. General Fong is a great foil to Aang and the gang, and I find it strange how he never returned again. However, all that is just the bread of the episode, so to speak. The delicious jam on top of it all is dedicated to Zuko, Iroh, and the introduction of new main antagonists, replacing the perfectly acceptable but not much more than that Zhao, Azula. The girl is competent to a T, stone cold, completely ruthless, and amazingly sadistic. She's a great change of pace for Zuko's arc, and is a sign of great things to come in Book 2. The Fire Nation's uncle and nephew duo removing their hair is an excellent way to finish off the episodes. Into the unknown it goes. I'm debating whether Book 2 or 3 is a superior season still. Alright, here we go. Return to Omashu time, and the introduction of the second most fun group of characters in the show. And, considering their only competition is the Avatar gang itself, that's pretty impressive. Azula, Mai and Ty Lee often steal the spotlight. Unfortunately, I will say, not the case in this episode. However, the reason it's fairly high up in the list isn't because of its shortcomings, and the introductions of Mai and Ty Lee are both very effective, don't get me wrong, and set up their eventual character arcs wonderfully. It's up here because of what it does well, and Return to Omashu, simply put, is, I know I've said it a lot, but it's so much fun. I'll be saying it a lot from now on, I imagine, but You tend to just have a great time watching this episode, there's so much to see. Azula and her new compatriots are great to watch do battle with Team Avatar, quickly proving themselves to be far more of a threat than Zuko and his soldiers could ever hope to be. But that being said, the episode feels like more of a showcase of what they can do, rather than having some real creative fun with it as later chapters do. Is it a great introduction though? Yes. And, of course, seeing Boomy is great as always. Man is a complete crazeball and I love him. The two Omashu episodes were extremely difficult to rank between each other, and I swear to God, I didn't mean for them to rank right next to each other, it's just kind of how it happened. I flirted between this and Return to Omashu taking the higher spot for a while before finally deciding on, well, this. Why? Well, I'll explain in a moment, but for now, let's start off with the character that gets introduced here. And yes, I mean... The titular king of Omashu is a big highlight of early Avatar. He's a treat every time he's on screen, and his duo of reveals, first of his body, then of his name, are such a great double whammy, with the second one being much more emotional on rewatch since you don't have to worry or be surprised by the mystery. Fun fact, Aang has tears in his eyes when he realises it's his old friend, and why wouldn't he? Quite possibly the only person from his childhood that is still alive today, and still just as much of a mad genius. It's a really powerful moment, certainly one of the most powerful so far on the episode list, and ever so slightly bumps over Return to Omashu for me. That one is better as a whole, but this one has the better singular moment. It's a very good episode, though I think the tone is just a little too light to the point of having little tension for the characters. But that's to be expected for early Avatar, and that might just make the later episodes shine even brighter.
Rocky!
Avatar, the stage musical, is not something I would have said would be a good idea. I mean, heck, we've seen the characters represented in live action, and the less we speak about that, the better. But strip away the live action, any sort of musical numbers, and just have some kick-ass dancing sequences between the characters we've grown to love? Sure, I'll take that, yes please. It's not how I would have started out Book 3 after its initial opening, which I will get to. And somehow I doubt it's the perfect way to do so, but it shows us many an important thing. The Fire Nation, as we knew beforehand, but it makes it very clear, isn't just made up of brutes and bullies. In fact, compared to normal people today, Aang could be seen as the abnormal one. It's interesting stuff for sure, and shows just how strange this little airbender is in the new world, as well as Ozai's grip over it. Not mind-boggling, but a lot of fun. The penultimate episode to Book 2 is a strange and mystifying adventure. It certainly isn't perfect, and most of the best things it does is setting up its in everything but name second part of 2, The Crossroads of Destiny. However, we're not here to talk about that yet, we're here to talk about the good parts of The Guru. And of them, there are many to pick. You have Sokka finally reuniting with his father after almost 2 full seasons of teasing and build-up, which, after how little I was caring about it in Battle of the Water Tribe, was surprisingly emotional. Zuko's finalised, genuinely happy metamorphosis is jarring to say the least, and this might sound strange, it's almost like a horror movie to me. As in, every time you see a scene with him and Iroh, you start to get tense and nervous. It's about to be the finale, you know his happiness and cheer with this simple life cannot possibly last. The Earth Kingdom's coup, courtesy of Azula and Long Fen, is fascinating to watch. It quickly becomes clear just how Empire Strikes Back this mid-show finale is going to be. Everything that could possibly go right for the antagonist is going completely right. And all of this isn't even touching on the titular Guru, his teachings to the last Airbender, and the best scene in the chapter. Guru Pathak is a mythical, spiritual character that skirts the line of trying too hard to be mythical and spiritual, We already had the best character in the show for that, but thankfully never crosses it. His teachings of chakras to Aang are rooted in reality, and from what I can find, they seem to be pretty similar to the real life equivalents. Of course, being respectful to cultures is one of the series' specialities. Him being here only to teach Aang the chakras does drag down the series a little, and therefore this episode. But then of course there's Toph, becoming the first ever metal bender while Pathic's best relevant speech plays overhead. It's just wonderful stuff. I'll be completely honest, I could barely remember what happened in this episode when I went back to rewatch it. I was prepared to put it up a bit lower than it already is. But not only do we get one of the most memorable set designs, they're not really sets, you know what I mean, of the entire series, even if they don't make a lot of sense the more you think about them, but also you finally get Zuko trying to team up with Team Avatar. It goes without saying, of course, but this is such a stretch from the Zuko from the start of the series, or even from an episode like the Blue Spirits. He is trying his best, and it really is agonising to see him get rejected from the gang time and time again. Though, of course, I will say, I completely understand Team Avatar's rejection of him. You get both sides. All topped off with a very dark beginning, running from the Day of Black Sun, and dark end, Katara threatening Zuko, which we know is not an empty threat considering what happens later. This episode is... It was surprisingly unmemorable to me, but its tone and drama hold it high above many of the others so far. And now, we go from an episode I found it hard to remember, to an episode this is very memorable. Something tells me the designers had a bit of a field day when working in this episode. Say, what should we do for the Fire Nation's newest attack in the Great Walls of Ba Sing Se? How about a drill? How about a drill twice the size of a subway tunnel? Well, this isn't the greatest outing of Azula and her deadly duo, it's certainly one of the most memorable, and the drill, the episode, not the machine, does a great job of setting the antagonist trio up some more, giving May and Ty Lee some great personal moments, and I've not even touched on our protagonists. And heck, by this point, what else can I even say? The gang are spectacular and there's not much else to it. Aang himself gets a very fancy showdown with Azula, Sokka and Katara get to teach us about mechanics and pressure, and Toph is the best, as always. Not to mention, this episode, while briefly, does start to set up the fact that the Grand City might not be the perfect sanctuary they need. True, the overly arrogant wall guard might just be a fluke, but, well, we'll get to the rest. One of the most famous episodes of the entire show, not just book one, and for good reason, this chapter is a good place to mark. Almost every single thing from here on out is absolutely excellent. You might think that in a show with 55 episodes, when you get to number 30 on this ranking, the episodes would still just be good, or even just okay. But that couldn't be further from the truth. Everything from now is amazing, really high tier entertainment. Now, let's move on to the mystery itself, the Blue Spirits. Ooh, it's Zuko. And the fact that it is Zuko is, obviously, the episode's greatest strength. I imagine in a lesser cartoon, in a lesser show, the antagonist would likely go off into some spiel either to themselves or the protagonist as to why they did what they did. But here, we only get the young prince's expressions and the guesses of Aang. It respects the audience so much, and I love it. It's such an important chapter to the story, not just for what happens in it, but for what happens later in the grand scheme of things. And it manages to get this all across in a dark, mysterious and gripping chapter all on its own. Even once you know the plot twist, you'll keep coming back for more. This one is a keeper. This particular chapter might be unpopularly high here, but what the heck, it's my list and I say Jet is a great chapter. What I think is singularly best about this episode is that Jet and his band of merry men could easily be the protagonists in another show. They really could, even with their more destructive tendencies. But their interactions and eventual clashings with Team Avatar show just how our main characters differ from the norm. Even in their own universe, they're not going to solve this with loads of death and destruction, and if you've seen Avatar's finale, you know that it turned out to be almost exactly right. That being said, something I don't see this episode get any credit for is it's actually pretty dark. Of course, it's not got anything on the likes of Appa's Lost Days or The Puppet Master, but for season 1, trying to decide just how many innocent lives are worth compared to the defeat of the tyrannical Fire Nation camps, I think it's pretty great. And as for the titular Jet himself, I think he's a legitimately amazing character, fight me. He's egotistical, he's so incredibly misguided, but you know where he's coming from, and I have a particular affinity for characters with uncommon weapons. I love his little hook swords. He's also a non-bender that can hold his own with Team Avatar, and that's pretty much the only one that can do that until Mei and Ty Lee, so good on him. The Waterbending Master is actually the first time we see the North Pole, the very thing our characters have been journeying towards since the very first episodes. And while I do still prefer the city of Ba Sing Se, I honestly think the Pole is a close second, fairly underrated in terms of locations. The place is breathtaking the first time we see it, it's really excellently designed and animated. I don't know, it might be the way it's drawn, but it has an ethereal quality to it that nothing in the Earth Kingdom or the Fire Nation matches. And this episode doesn't even have the best parts. Speaking of this episode, it's just great, because of course it is. Not even touching the deepening story of Zuko, but this chapter also decides to casually challenge sexism. Does it work? Well, it's open to debate. Not sure if I'm a fan of the necklace being the deciding factor instead of, you know, Katara's raw skill, but at the very least it gives the titular master plenty of character. That being said, it's actually the very first same bender on bender action we've seen in the series, and clears up just how things work in the first of many, many amazing waterbending action sequences to come. Then we get the introduction of Sokka's new friend, and the discovery of new waterbending techniques, and the Fire Nation's largest battalion yet on the march. There's just so much going on in this episode, and yet it feels so well fleshed out. Maybe with the exception of Yui, but we'll get to her. Again, I didn't mean to include this right beside the Waterbending Master, I really didn't. Now, to get one thing off my back before anything else, I think it's a bit of an overrated episode. Fantastic? Oh, absolutely. But top 10 material? Well, you can see its placement. Okay, now that that's been said, holy hell, this is a great chapter. The final 5 minutes in particular are some of the best in the entire show, period. The dragons, with how little screen time they have, clearly have so much power and awe behind them. You really get the feeling that these are the old rulers of Earth. The score, the presentation, everything in the last few minutes is so much better than I can describe, and if you've seen it, you know it. The 3/4 of episode before that, though, well, it's in no way bad, just perfectly fine to me. Zuko and Aang getting some development together is fun, but I don't know, it doesn't feel like there's quite enough tension and not quite enough comedy. It doesn't pick a lane enough. Though something I am quite saddened about is that nothing more was done with the ancient firebenders. Like, almost every single named character returns in some capacity after their introduction, and the fact that these guys are one and done just makes them feel a little more, I don't know, inconsequential, not part of the world. Getting the words for this episode is hard, okay, but just know that the positives are far, far outweighing the negatives here. Hi, if you're listening to this, then part 1 and 2 haven't been spliced together yet. Thanks so much for watching. I'd love to see if you like and subscribe, and until next time, my channel's really been blowing up recently, so I guess I wasn't lying when I said 2023 was going to be a big year for the channel. I just wasn't expecting it to be big so quickly. Thanks so much if you're watching this. See you all soon.